These 7th chords will completely change the way that you build your progressions. In today's video, we're uncovering the hidden gems of 7th chords. Minor 7 flat 5, half diminished, 7 sus2 and 7 sus4. Whether you're after dreamy, suspenseful or harmonically rich sounds, these chords are the secret weapon to making your music stand out. And the best part? They're easier to use than you might think. Let's start with the basics. I like to think of chords like buildings in a city. This helps us to understand not only how they function, but also how they are constructed. The most basic chords are built with 3 notes and are called triads. So we can think of these like a 3-story building. On the ground floor is the most important note, the root note. This note is the foundation of the chord, and from which we measure the distance to all other notes. It's also what gives the chord its relevant letter. For example, C major and C minor chords would both have the root notes of C. You'll often see this note represented with the letter 1. On the first floor of the chord building, we have a choice of notes: 2nd, 3rd, flat 3rd or 4th. Depending on what sort of triad you're constructing, will change which of these notes you use. The difference comes down to the distance between each of these notes and the root note. The distance between 2 notes in music is called an interval. Intervals are measured using the smallest distance in Western music, which is called a semitone or half step. This is the distance between the notes on the piano or frets on a guitar. The notes on the first floor of our building represent the following intervals: major 2nd, which spans 2 half steps, minor 3rd, which spans 3 half steps, major 3rd, which covers 4 half steps, and a perfect 4th, which spans 5 half steps. On the second floor of the chord building are the 5th and flat or diminished 5th note. Once again, the choice of note depends on the triad being constructed. The 5 represents the perfect 5th interval, which spans 7 half steps, and the flat 5 represents the diminished 5th, also called the tritone, which covers 6 half steps. We can use these intervals to play a range of triads, some of which you might be familiar with. 1, 3 and 5 construct a major triad, 1, flat 3 and 5 minor chords, and 1, flat 3 and flat 5 are diminished triads. For example, you could play C major with the notes C, E and G, C minor with the notes C, E flat and G, and C diminished with the notes C, E flat and G flat. You also have chords which don't use any sort of 3rd note. These are called suspended chords. There is a sus2 chord with the notes 1, 2 and 5, and the sus4 with the notes 1, 4 and 5. So C sus2 would have the notes C, D and G, and C sus4 is constructed with C, F and G. We can use these triads as the base for 7th chords. These are 4-note chords that add a 7th interval above one of these triads to create interesting sounding chords. There are 2 7th intervals to know: minor 7th, which spans 10 half steps, or a major 7th, which is 11 half steps. Now we've got a framework for thinking about 7th chords, let's start with the first type that can help you to build bigger sounds: minor 7 flat 5. These are also known as half diminished chords, which is sometimes represented by a small circle with a line through it. They're constructed by taking the diminished triad and adding a minor 7th interval. As such, you'll see them written as 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. You can also just take a minor 7th chord and lower the 5th note to create them, hence the name minor 7 flat 5. This is a tense, awkward chord that wants to resolve to something a bit more settled. Here's how C minor 7 flat 5 sounds with the notes C, E flat, G flat and B flat. Minor 7 flat 5 chords feature diatonically as the 7 chord in major keys and the 2 chords in natural minor keys. You are actually more likely to hear them in songs than the standard diminished triad. The main use of this chord in major keys is to pull the listener towards the 1 tonic chord. Here's an example in the key of C major with some other 7th chords for comparison. They also resolve quite well in the opposite direction, down towards the neighbouring 6th chord. Here's how that could look in the key of C major. In minor keys, the 2 minor 7 flat 5 will often lead up to the flat 3 chord. Here's an example in the key of A minor. You'll also hear it leading back down to the 1 tonic chord. For example, two minor 7 flat 5 also works well as a predominant chord. That is playing it before the 5 chord, or more commonly, the borrowed dominant 7th 5 chord. This prolongs the tension that 2 minor 7 flat 5 creates, as it doesn't resolve with the 5 dominant 7th. Instead, both chords want to move back to the 1 tonic chord. Here's how that could sound in the key of A minor. Although 2 minor 7 flat 5 isn't diatonic to major keys, you'll sometimes see it used in a similar way, as a borrowed predominant chord. Here's how that sounds in the key of C major. Now let's think about the 7 sus2 and 7 sus4 buildings. These are sus2 and sus4 chords with an added minor 7th interval. So 7 sus2 has the notes 1, 2, 5 and flat 7, and 7 sus4 uses 1, 4, 5 and flat 7. For example, C7 sus2 has the notes C, D, G and B flat. And C7 sus4 has the notes C, F, G and B flat. Because these chords don't have any sort of third note, they are neither major nor minor. As such, they have an openness that you find in the standard sus chords, but with an extra edge due to the minor 7th interval. In major keys, you'll often see these chords used just like standard sus chords. The main position is as the 5 chord, delaying resolution back to the 1 chord. For example, here's how both 7 sus2 and 7 sus4 sound in this position in the key of C major. You can also diatonically play the 6 and 2 chords in major keys as either of these 7 sus varieties, plus the 3 chord as the 7 sus4. This can allow you to mix and match chord types to give your progressions a more interesting character and feel. Here's an example in the key of C major that uses several 7 sus chords. You can also use these chords in minor keys. They can both be played diatonically as the 1, 4 and flat 7 chords, whilst the 5 chord can be played diatonically as 7 sus4. Their role is the same, delaying resolution and providing interest, particularly if you are hanging out on a single chord for a while. Listen to this example in the key of A minor for a feel of its flavour. It also uses minor 7 and standard sus4. The problem with these 7th chords is that they are not the most widely used variety out there. To understand the big 3 7th chords, you need to watch the video on screen now.